There comes a time in every soul's journey when obedience is not passive but prophetic, when silence is no longer pious but dangerous, and when the very trick you were told not to use now becomes the weapon God hands you himself. You see, the difference between disobedience and divine timing is who gives the order. Once, Christ refused to turn stones into bread in the wilderness, though he could. Why? Because Satan told him to. But later, when 5,000 were hungry, what did he do? He multiplied bread. The miracle was not wrong. The timing and the voice behind the suggestion mattered. So now, God says, use the forbidden trick, not because it was wrong, but because it is now righteous. Let me give you 5 key truths. There are seasons when God asks for restraint, not because you're weak, but because you're in training. In times of peace, he teaches you how to be still, how to listen, how to trust without needing to act. He doesn't allow you to draw your sword, not because he doesn't want you to fight, but because he's sharpening it. In the quiet, you're not denied power. You're being refined for a greater purpose. But peace is not eternal in this world. There comes a time when the winds shift, and what once looked like disobedience now becomes divine command. The very act you held out of reverence is now what God calls you to unleash out of obedience. You didn't speak before, not because you had nothing to say, but because God was cultivating your voice. And now he says, cry aloud and spare not. You didn't move before, not because you lacked courage, but because God was anchoring your steps. And now he says, go forward. The difference between disobedience and obedience is not the action, but who commands it and when. In peace, God teaches you surrender. In war, he demands boldness. What once seemed like arrogance becomes holy courage when heaven says, now. The timing sanctifies the act, that forbidden trick. The confidence, the voice, the gift, the bold prayer. It wasn't wrong. It was just not yet, and now it is. So do not confuse former silence for permanent stillness. God does not raise warriors only to keep them in hiding. When the battle comes to your door, what was once unthinkable becomes unavoidable. You were trained in peace for this very war, and now the command has changed. Now the silence breaks, now the fire falls, now the forbidden becomes the faithful. There are boundaries God sets around you, not to punish you, but to prepare you. There were doors he kept closed, not because you were unworthy, but because you weren't ready to walk through them without being crushed by what waited on the other side. The limits you lived under were never meant to be life sentences. They were training grounds, holy restraints designed to strengthen your will, purify your motives, and refine your character. You were told, not yet. You were held back when others surged ahead. You watched in silence while others spoke loudly. And maybe you started to believe the lie that this was all you'd ever be. A sideline soul, a background player in your own life. But what you didn't see was that God was building something deeper than visibility. He was cultivating spiritual muscle. He was enlarging your spirit in the shadows. Limits aren't always punishments. Sometimes they are hidden promotions. Like a seed buried in darkness, your stillness wasn't stagnation. It was sacred incubation. The time you spent waiting was God working. And now, the God who once said, wait, is whispering, go. The one who once said, be quiet, is declaring, speak. Because the lesson is complete, the training is over. And the ceiling you once called limitation is now the platform beneath your feet. Don't carry old chains into new seasons. What restrained you before doesn't rule you now. When God removes a limit, don't apologize for walking free. You've been released, not just from the past, but into the purpose that delay prepared you for. The wilderness wasn't your identity, it was your preparation. And now that your spirit is trained, your steps are ordered. The walls that once held you in will now echo with the sound of your victory. Satan is a master of imitation. He takes what is holy and twists it, what is powerful and perverts it, what is sacred and stains it. He offers shortcuts to glory, void of suffering, void of surrender, void of God. He uses the same tools that God designed for good authority, speech, influence, even spiritual gifts, and attempts to seduce you into using them for pride, control, or selfish gain. He doesn't tempt you with what is foreign. He tempts you with a distorted version of what is familiar. In the wilderness, Satan approached Jesus and said, "Turn these stones into bread." Was it a sin to make bread? No. Jesus would later multiply loaves to feed thousands, but Satan's version was rooted in self, proving power instead of fulfilling purpose. You see, the trick wasn't evil. It was who suggested it and why. This is how the enemy works. He tries to trick you into using your God-given gifts outside of God's given time. He wants to make you doubt that the power within you is good, by tempting you to use it the wrong way. And when you resist, when you walk away, when you lay your gifts at the altar instead of grabbing them with ambition, God takes note. He stores up those same tools for a divine moment when they will no longer be used to prove yourself, but to glorify Him. And then God brings you full circle. He hands back to you what the enemy tried to make you misuse. The very voice the devil wanted you to use to dominate, God now tells you to use to declare truth. The strength the enemy tried to use for intimidation, God now tells you to use for intercession. The insight once twisted for manipulation, God now anoints for wisdom. What Satan used to tempt, God now uses to triumph. The trick wasn't cursed, it was just contaminated. Now cleansed, it becomes your weapon of war. Your past temptation becomes someone else's freedom. Your former struggle becomes heaven's tool for breakthrough. Don't be afraid to reclaim what the enemy distorted. Don't hesitate to walk in the fullness of what God is now breathing on. Because the same hands that once trembled in temptation are now raised in victory. The trick was never the problem. The purpose behind it was. And now, with your heart purified and your ears tuned to God's voice, what was once a stumbling block becomes a stepping stone. What was once bait becomes a blade in your hand. Satan used it to tempt you. God now uses it to triumph through you. God has a way of waiting until every logical option is exhausted, until every earthly door is closed, until the crowd has scattered and the clock has ticked past midnight. And then He speaks. Then He moves. Then He says, "Now go." Not when it's comfortable, not when it makes sense, not when you still have something left to lean on, but when your back is against the wall and your faith is the only thing still standing. That's how God works, not because He delights in your desperation, but because He wants to make sure that when the breakthrough comes, there is no confusion about where it came from. He waits until it looks too late so no man can take the credit. He waits until the Red Sea is in front of you and Pharaoh's army is closing in behind you, and then, only then, does He say to Moses, "Stretch out your hand." It didn't make sense. There was no precedent. No one had ever split a sea before, but God wasn't asking for logic. He was asking for obedience, and the moment Moses moved, the miracle began. That's how God operates. He waits until all natural options are dead so that resurrection power is the only answer left. God does not panic at the sight of your impossible. Heaven isn't rushed by your deadline. He sees the end from the beginning, and His silence is not absence. It is setup. He allows the tension to rise so the glory will be undeniable. He allows the storm to build so your faith can deepen. And when it looks like hope is gone, when it feels like you missed your moment, He declares now. Now is the time to move forward, not because the path is clear, but because the command is divine. Now is the time to speak, not because you have all the answers, but because God has lit the fire inside you. The delay wasn't a denial. It was God making room for His timing to collide with your calling. So don't be discouraged if it feels too late. Don't walk away because the window seems to have closed. With God, delay is never defeat. And sometimes He waits for the world to write you off so He can write you back in. The late hour is His chosen hour. The 11th hour is when heaven opens its greatest miracles. He waits until it looks too late, because that's when His glory shines the brightest. God is not a lawbreaker. He is the lawgiver. He does not operate through chaos or rebellion, but through divine order. Yet within that order, there is something deeper than rules, relationship. And because of that relationship, God is not bound by human expectations, timelines, or traditions. He doesn't break rules. He breaks chains. The Pharisees were obsessed with rules. They saw healing on the Sabbath as a violation, but Jesus saw it as liberation. They clung to the letter of the law while ignoring the spirit of it. And when Jesus set people free, they accused Him of disorder, when in fact He was restoring true order, the kingdom of God. You see, God isn't interested in keeping you trapped in rituals that no longer serve your growth. He doesn't ask you to stay in systems that oppress you just because they look religious. The rules people made to control you are not the commandments God gave to free you. He will never contradict Himself, but He will confront false prisons disguised as piety. There are moments when God moves in ways that look unconventional, even scandalous to the religious eye. He'll lift someone up you thought was disqualified. He'll use a method that doesn't make sense to the masses. He'll bypass tradition to heal a heart, not because He's lawless, but because He's Lord. Chains come in many forms: fear, shame, addiction, guilt, legalism, the weight of others' expectations. And while people may tell you to stay in line, stay small, stay quiet, God says, you've been in that prison long enough. He walks into your cell, not to negotiate with your chains, but to shatter them. God is not trying to turn you into a rule follower. He's transforming you into a free son or daughter of the kingdom, and that freedom doesn't mean chaos, it means clarity. You're no longer bound by the lies of the past, no longer trapped by man-made ceilings, no longer walking on eggshells to earn love that's already yours. When God breaks your chains, He doesn't leave you lawless. He leads you into liberty, not the liberty to sin, but the liberty to rise. To become, to obey not out of fear, but out of fire. The fire of knowing you are fully known and still fully loved. So when you see God moving outside the lines others drew for you, don't be afraid. He's not violating truth. He's revealing it. He's not throwing out the law. He's fulfilling it in you, and when He fulfills it, the shackles must fall. He never broke the rules, but He sure broke the chains that were breaking you. My friends, when God says use it now, He's not giving you a shortcut. He's giving you His sign. Don't be afraid to walk in what once looked off limits, because now it's not you who are speaking, moving, rising, it's God through you. The trick wasn't forbidden because it was evil. It was waiting to be holy, and now it is time.